My beloved child. Something has finally come to the surface. A third party who had been quietly influencing this connection has just been exposed in a way your soulmate did not expect, and now the person connected to you is seeing several past moments very differently. For a long time, they thought the distance between you had happened naturally. They believed misunderstandings were simply misunderstandings. They believed certain doubts had come from their own mind. They believed the silence between you was just another sign that perhaps the connection had reached its end. But now something has happened that has forced them to question that entire story. Someone said too much. A detail slipped out. A contradiction appeared. And suddenly your person realized that another voice may have been standing between the two of you far more than they understood. Don't skip. Stay till the end because something huge is waiting for you. The most shocking part is not simply that someone interfered. It is what your soulmate is considering doing next. Because the third party expected the truth to create even more distance. Instead, it may have done the opposite. It made your soulmate want to hear your side directly. And this is where everything becomes deeper. At first, your person did not want to believe it. They had trusted this third party in some way. Maybe as a friend. Maybe as someone close to the family. Maybe as a coworker. Maybe simply as someone whose opinion they respected. The person did not necessarily enter the situation looking obviously dangerous. That is what made the interference difficult to see. It may have looked like concern. Advice. Protection. Simple curiosity. Are you sure about this person? Maybe you should slow down. I heard something you might want to know. I'm only saying this because I don't want you getting hurt. At first, those words seemed harmless. Your soulmate may even have been grateful. They were already confused about their feelings for you. The connection had become emotionally important, and importance can make people vulnerable. So when another person spoke with confidence, your soulmate listened. Not because they wanted to think badly of you. Because they were afraid of being wrong. They wanted someone to tell them what they could not understand for themselves. But slowly, small doubts began entering places where trust had once lived. A harmless delay in your response suddenly looked suspicious. A quiet mood became something bigger. Something you said was interpreted through somebody else's explanation. Instead of asking you what you meant, your person started wondering what the third party would say about it. That is how interference can work. Not by destroying something overnight. By changing the meaning of small things. And for a while, neither of you may have understood what was happening. Maybe you noticed your soulmate becoming more guarded. Questions became shorter. Warmth became inconsistent. A connection that had once felt natural suddenly felt like you were walking through a room filled with invisible obstacles. You may have wondered. What changed? Why are they suddenly looking at me differently? Why does it feel like I'm defending myself against something nobody will explain? But your person did not have the courage or clarity to tell you what they had been hearing. And the third party benefited from that silence. Because when two people stop speaking directly, someone else's interpretation can become louder than the truth. That is exactly what your soulmate is beginning to understand. What happened recently exposed a contradiction they could no longer ignore. The third party referenced something private. Something they supposedly did not know. Your soulmate immediately noticed. Maybe it was a conversation that had happened only between you and your person. Maybe it was a feeling you had expressed privately. Maybe it was something your soulmate had shared in confidence and later discovered had somehow been used to shape another story. Whatever the detail was, it created one disturbing question. How did you know that? The third party hesitated. Perhaps they tried to change the subject. Perhaps they laughed. Perhaps they gave an explanation that sounded almost convincing. But not quite. And when your soulmate asked another question, the story changed. That was the moment. One version became another. A timeline stopped making sense. A person who had always sounded certain suddenly sounded defensive. Your soulmate felt something inside them shift. They remembered another conversation. Then another. A warning that had seemed reasonable at the time suddenly sounded different. A comment about you that had been presented as fact now looked more like interpretation. A supposed concern suddenly looked strangely personal. And your soulmate began connecting things they had never connected before. Don't skip, because this is where the exposure becomes emotional. Your person did not simply realize, someone interfered. They realized. I allowed them to. That thought hurt more. Because blaming another person would have been easier. It would have been easier to say the third party caused everything. But your soulmate knows that is not completely true. Someone may have planted doubt. Someone may have repeated private information. Someone may have encouraged distance. But your soulmate still made choices. They chose not to ask you certain questions. They chose silence when clarity was possible. They chose assumption when conversation was available. And now they are beginning to see the cost of those choices. One memory keeps returning. It may have been a day when you sensed something had changed. Maybe you asked, "Is everything okay?" And they said, "Yeah, everything's fine." But it wasn't. Inside, they were carrying something someone else had said. You could feel the wall. You may have tried to move closer emotionally. They moved back. Not because your presence suddenly mattered less. Because doubt had become louder than trust. Now, looking back, they remember your expression. They remember the confusion in your voice. And perhaps for the first time they understand what that moment must have felt like from your side. You were reacting to a problem you had never been told existed. That realization has created regret. But there is another layer. The third party may have expected the exposure to turn your soulmate against you one final time. Instead, your soulmate started defending you. Maybe not publicly at first. Maybe it began internally. A thought. That doesn't match what I experienced. Then another. That's not exactly what happened. Then. Why am I hearing their version instead of asking the person who was actually there? Those thoughts became stronger. Eventually your soulmate may have challenged the third party directly. Not dramatically. Not with shouting. Just one question at a time. Did they actually say that? Did you hear it yourself? Why did you tell me this differently before? How do you know what they were thinking? And suddenly the confidence disappeared. Some answers were based on assumptions. Some came from second-hand information. Some may have been exaggerated. Some may have been mixed with personal feelings. The more your soulmate asked, the clearer it became. They had been given a story about you. Not necessarily the truth about you. And that distinction changed everything. The third party expected your soulmate to continue trusting their interpretation. What they did not expect was for your soulmate to turn inward and start questioning their own behavior. That is the next move nobody saw coming. Your soulmate is thinking about contacting you. Not to accuse you. Not to demand answers. Not to restart old arguments. They want to hear you. Directly. That possibility has been growing ever since the exposure. But there is something they still haven't admitted. Reaching out frightens them. Because what would they say? Someone interfered? That would not be enough. They know you might respond. Why did you believe them? And they do not have a comfortable answer. Maybe because they were afraid. Maybe because they were immature. Maybe because trusting someone else's certainty felt easier than facing their own feelings. Maybe because the connection with you was becoming serious enough that losing it scared them. Sometimes people sabotage what matters because caring deeply creates risk. Your person may be realizing that now. They did not necessarily stop caring when they became distant. Part of them may have become distant because they cared too much and did not know how to handle the vulnerability. The third party found an opening inside that fear. And once doubt entered, your soulmate began treating you like a problem to solve rather than a person to understand. That is one of their deepest regrets. They wish they had looked at you and simply asked. Tell me what is true. No outside opinions. No interpretation. No hidden conversations. Just honesty. They imagine how different things might have been. But they also know there is no use pretending the past can be changed. What matters now is what they choose to do with what they know. And this is where the connection starts pointing forward instead of backward. Your soulmate has begun imagining a conversation with you. Not a dramatic reunion. Something quieter. They imagine saying, I found out things were not exactly the way I thought. They imagine your face. Maybe skeptical. Maybe hurt. Maybe calm. Maybe completely unreadable. Then they imagine saying the harder sentence. I should have asked you directly. That sentence is important. Because it contains accountability. They know the third party cannot carry all the blame. The truth may expose interference, but it also exposes how easily communication between you broke down. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that if another chapter ever opens, it cannot be built on the same habits. No letting outsiders translate your feelings. No letting fear make decisions. No using silence as protection. No waiting until everything falls apart before asking simple questions. They want something different now. More honest. More mature. More direct. And that thought surprises them. Because they had told themselves they were finished thinking about, what if? But now the biggest, what if, has returned. What if this connection did not fail because it lacked meaning? What if it became quiet because too many things were left unexplained? That question is changing them. And there is another discovery. Your soulmate has started replaying moments when someone tried to turn them against you. They remember how they felt when they heard negative things. At first, fear. Then doubt. But underneath those emotions was always resistance. A part of them kept thinking, "That doesn't sound like the person I know." They ignored that instinct. Now they wish they had trusted it more. They remember your kindness. The way you noticed small details. The way you showed up when nobody else knew they were struggling. They remember moments where your actions contradicted the negative story being told. Maybe someone described you as selfish. But they remember you sacrificing something without making a big deal about it. Maybe someone said you were emotionally careless. But they remember how you noticed the smallest change in their mood. Maybe someone said you never really cared. But they remember things you did that made no sense if there had been no feeling. One memory after another is forcing them to reconsider everything. What if I misunderstood what this connection truly meant? That question has become impossible to avoid. And the exposure of the third party did something else. It showed your soulmate how much your name still affects them. They thought they had moved beyond the emotional intensity. Then they heard someone speaking unfairly about you. Something inside them reacted immediately. Defensiveness. Frustration. A desire to correct the story. They did not expect that reaction. It revealed that underneath all the confusion, you still matter. Not because someone told them you should. Not because they are trapped in nostalgia. Because their own emotional memory of you remains stronger than they expected. And this is where everything becomes deeper. Your soulmate is not only angry about what the third party did. They are thinking about why the interference worked. That requires uncomfortable honesty. Maybe they were too dependent on other people's approval. Maybe they cared too much about what friends or family thought. Maybe they were afraid of making a decision nobody else understood. Maybe the connection challenged the image they had of the kind of person they were supposed to choose. Maybe admitting how strongly they felt about you would have required them to stand alone emotionally. They were not ready then. They may be more ready now. Distance changed something. Silence made them think. Other connections may have taught them what emotional compatibility actually feels like. And now they can see that rare things do not always arrive in perfect packages. Sometimes the most meaningful connection is the one that requires courage. Courage to trust your own experience. Courage to communicate. Courage to stop letting the loudest person in the room make decisions for your heart. That is what they are learning. But there is still one thing they haven't been able to admit. They wonder if you would ever trust them again. That question may be harder than wondering whether you still care. Because even if feelings remain, trust can change. They understand that. You may have built walls. You may have learned to protect yourself from inconsistency. You may no longer be willing to accept silence where communication belongs. And strangely, your soulmate respects that more now than they would have before. Because growth has taught them something. Wanting another chance is not the same as deserving one. If they ever approach you, they know they cannot arrive with excuses. They have to arrive with truth. I should have trusted my experience with you more than someone else's assumptions. I let doubt influence me. I should have spoken to you. I understand now that my silence may have hurt you. Those are difficult words. But they are the words growing inside them. What happens next changes the meaning of their silence. Because the third party expected them to remain afraid of the connection. Instead, your soulmate is now becoming afraid of something else. The possibility that they may have lost something meaningful because they refused to communicate when it mattered. That fear is different. It is not panic. It is clarity. They are realizing there may never be a perfect moment to say what needs to be said. There may never be a guarantee that you respond warmly. There may never be certainty that another chapter is possible. But avoiding the truth has already cost enough. That is why their next move may be the last thing the third party expected. They are considering removing outside voices from the situation completely. No more updates. No more explaining their feelings to everyone else before speaking to you. No more giving people private access to something they do not belong inside. Your soulmate may begin setting boundaries. They may stop discussing you with the person who interfered. They may distance themselves from that influence. They may question other things they have been told. And most importantly, they may decide that any future decision about you should be based on what happens between you and them. That does not guarantee reconciliation. But psychologically, it is a major shift. They are taking ownership of their heart. And once they do that, another memory surfaces. They remember when the connection felt easiest. Before everybody had opinions. Before everything became complicated. Before assumptions entered. There were moments when it was simply two people talking. Laughing. Understanding each other. Feeling something neither person could fully name. Those are the memories your soulmate now trusts most. Because nobody else created them. Nobody else interpreted them. They happened. And there is something powerful about recognizing the difference between what was experienced and what was later said about the experience. Your person is starting to return to the original evidence. Your behavior. Their behavior. The things that actually happened. That is making the third party's influence look smaller and smaller. But the biggest truth is still ahead. Your soulmate has begun wondering whether the third party interfered because they recognized something your soulmate was afraid to recognize. That the connection mattered. Perhaps this person saw how your soulmate changed when your name came up. Maybe they noticed the attention. The softness. The emotional investment. And something about it made them uncomfortable. Maybe they were jealous. Maybe protective. Maybe controlling. Maybe they genuinely believed they were helping. Your soulmate may never know the exact motivation. But they no longer need to. Because the intention matters less now than the lesson. No outsider should have had enough power to shape something that belonged between two people. Your soulmate knows that now. And if another opportunity appears, they want to protect the connection differently. Not by hiding it. Not by isolating themselves. Healthy relationships can include friends, family, and advice. But advice should not replace communication. That is the difference they finally understand. They would listen differently now. They would ask you directly. They would notice when an outsider's opinion did not match their own experience. They would refuse to treat rumors as facts. They would say the important things sooner. And if another chapter ever opened, they would enter it differently. That sentence has become a promise to themselves. If another chapter ever opens, I want to enter it differently. Not perfectly. Differently. More awake. More responsible. More willing to defend the connection with honesty rather than secrecy. And here is the secret hope they have barely admitted. They wonder whether you know any of this. They wonder if you ever suspected a third person was influencing things. Maybe you felt it before they did. Maybe there were moments when you sensed somebody else's words inside your soulmate's reactions. Maybe you could tell certain questions did not sound like them. Maybe you wondered why something private suddenly seemed to carry outside judgment. They wonder whether you noticed. And if you did, they wonder why you stayed silent too. Perhaps you were tired of defending yourself. Perhaps you thought they should know you well enough. Perhaps you believed explaining yourself would only make you look guilty. Perhaps you chose dignity over chasing someone who had already become distant. Your soulmate is thinking about all of those possibilities. And something inside them wants to know your truth. Not the third party's truth. Not their old assumptions. Yours. This is where the future picture begins. They imagine the silence ending. Maybe through a message. Maybe through a call. Maybe through an unexpected conversation. They imagine saying, "There's something I need to acknowledge." Not, "I need you back." Not, "Everything was someone else's fault." Just acknowledgement. "I found out someone influenced the way I saw certain things, and I should have come to you instead." They imagine how quiet that moment might become. Because real accountability does not need a speech. Sometimes one truthful sentence can carry years of regret. Then they imagine listening. Really listening. They want to hear what you experienced. What you noticed. Where you felt betrayed. Where you felt misunderstood. What you believed when the silence began. And perhaps what you never had the chance to say. That is the conversation they are beginning to want more than any fantasy of instant reunion. They want truth first. Because without truth, another chapter would simply repeat the old one. But with truth, they do not know what becomes possible. That mystery is what keeps returning. What if there is still something meaningful waiting beyond the silence? They cannot answer that alone. And they know it. But there is another major realization. The third party may have helped create distance, but distance itself revealed something they never expected. Your value became clearer. When they stopped hearing your voice regularly, they started remembering the way conversations with you felt. When they stopped having access to your presence, they began noticing its absence. When other people came into their life, they began comparing emotional experiences. And slowly, something became undeniable. Nothing felt quite the same. Not because everyone else was wrong. Not because you were perfect. Because the emotional combination was rare. The way you listened. The way they felt around you. The way ordinary conversations could suddenly become deep. The way both of you could move between laughter and vulnerability without forcing it. They had taken that for granted. Now they understand it differently. I understand your value differently now. That sentence keeps returning. And the exposure of this third person pushed that realization into the open. Because your soulmate finally separated two things. Who other people said you were. And who they remember you being. Their memories won. That does not erase every problem. But it changes the emotional foundation. And now we reach the final truth. The third party expected exposure to create chaos. They probably expected your soulmate to become defensive. Maybe angry at you. Maybe embarrassed. Maybe determined to shut the entire situation down. Instead, your soulmate became quieter. More reflective. More serious. Because they are no longer asking what everybody else thinks they should do. They are asking themselves, what do I actually know? What did I actually experience? What do I wish I had done differently? And finally, what would I do if I had one honest chance to speak to this person again? The answer surprised them. They would tell you the truth. They would admit they let outside influence matter too much. They would tell you that distance made them realize what they lost. They would apologize for the places where silence replaced communication. And they would ask something simple. Can I hear your side now? That may be their next move. Not a grand declaration. Not a guarantee of reunion. A conversation. And sometimes the most shocking move is not choosing love. It is choosing truth after spending so long hiding from it. Your soulmate understands now that the third party did not have the final word. Neither did the silence. Neither did the misunderstanding. The final word belongs to what the two people involved choose to do with the truth once they finally see it. Their deepest hidden message has become, I should have trusted what I knew about you instead of letting other voices tell me who you were. And beneath that sentence is another. I understand now why you stayed in my heart. You remained there because the connection was never made meaningful by someone else's approval. It became meaningful in small moments. Private moments. Ordinary moments. Moments nobody else could fully understand because nobody else was there. Distance did not erase those memories. It stripped away the noise around them. And now your soulmate can finally see what belonged to the connection and what was placed on top of it by other people. Perhaps the future does not mean returning to yesterday. Perhaps yesterday has already taught everything it needed to teach. If another chapter exists, it would have to be built differently. With direct communication. Clear boundaries. More honesty. Less fear. And two people deciding what their connection means before allowing anyone else to define it. Whether that chapter ever opens remains unknown. But one thing inside your soulmate has already changed. They no longer want somebody else carrying your voice. They want to hear it from you. Perhaps the real question is no longer why a third party interfered. Perhaps the real question is what happens when the two people who were separated by assumptions finally speak without anyone standing between them. And somewhere inside your soulmate, that possibility has become far harder to ignore than the silence ever was.